The danger with labeling anything a minority is immediately there's a negative connotation. When someone is labeled as a minority group, somehow that indicates that they have been oppressed, or it suggests that they've been oppressed, it suggests that they have a less adequate role in society. So I tend to think of the Muslim community in Europe as opposed to the Muslim minority in Europe. That's just my own personal terminology. I think the media has to be careful with the words it chooses, and one of the mistakes is choosing, I think, the wrong words. So when it comes to the Muslims in Europe and the Muslim community in Europe, it's the issue of finding a balance, not just for Muslims but other communities too, but finding a balance between integration and keeping some degree of individual and cultural identity. And Europe, the biggest challenges has been where the economics and recent economics of the financial crash and the global meltdown has stressed European countries to the degree where any imposition on the country's social security system or its financial system makes the sort of indigenous population, the original, if you like, sort of ethnic population, very unhappy. So for example, in Spain you see an influx of a lot of Muslims coming in from countries like Morocco, and a lot of the Spaniards who might have been fairly relaxed about it, 10, 20 years ago, are now saying, wait a minute, they're draining our system, we don't have enough financial strength to be able to support a community that's not contributing to the productivity of the country. So there's that issue. Then there's the issue of cultural identity, and then you have people in France, for example, young women wearing the veil, the hijab. That raises a lot of hackles because this economic stress has created a focus on that community. Suddenly they're identifiable by their difference in dress. Now, had the pressure been on, say, Orthodox Jews with their clothing, or perhaps other communities that dress a certain way, maybe Arabs wearing traditional robes, the same kind of thing. The community is identified by its clothing. Pakistanis in Britain wearing shalwar kameez, they're identified as different, and that adds to the focus of them as a target. It's anything that's perceived as some kind of threat, and the threat could be economic, it could be a little more cultural. I think it comes down to economics to a large degree though, because when people are happy and they're content and they have everything and they see the communities thriving, they don't tend to look for excuses as to why they are not doing so well. And in recent years the target has been the immigrant population, much of which has been Muslim. That's why I think the Muslim group, the community in Europe has been targeted more. So, but then there is the other side of it, and this is where I said integration and individual identity. In many cases, those coming over haven't made an effort to integrate, especially the older generation. Their feeling is, why should I have to start learning a new language? Why do I have to change the way I live? Why can't I live the way I did in Morocco, for example, if they're in Spain? And I think the tensions arise when groups come in from outside and there's no real sense of assimilation, that they become ghettoized. And we see this with the African population, from the French African colonies. We see it with Pakistanis and Indians in Britain, where maybe the older generation is living more in enclaves, for example, Birmingham, Yorkshire, the north of England. And so the tensions that occur when immigrant communities come in fairly large numbers and can't assimilate as smoothly as might be needed, that's when the focus occurs, and that's where the tensions arise. I don't think it's entirely a Muslim thing, I don't think it's specifically a religious thing. I think those just become markers, and the media loves to focus on those. We are in a globalized world. There's no issue of saying Muslims can only live in the East and Christians live in the West. There was always a blend in the Middle East of Christian, Muslims and Jews. The Abrahamic religions originated from the same spot, and when you consider that, you immediately have to say, well, wait a minute, the religion doesn't belong to any geography when it spreads around the world. It has its origins in a particular geography, but you can't say just because a person is Muslim in the West they are not entitled to be there. This is what I mean by markers, things that become a focal point. The issue of minarets would not have been any issue at all had it not been for the focus on a particular community, in this case the Muslim community. The sense also now with the news, and the media unfortunately tends to focus on bad news, that much of the many of the problems that the sort of attacks, for example, and insurgencies that are perpetrated come from the Muslim world. So there's a tendency to be suspicious of Muslims in general. And so because many of those who are involved in suicide bombing or in attacks or in kidnappings or whatever, because they come from a Muslim background, the whole religion and the whole community becomes a target. And then that draws in the issues of how they dress, the places they attend for worship. These things wouldn't be an issue if there wasn't so much focus on the threat of Islam, which is how many of the sort of the critics see. Well, that's the irony, is that integration was taking place in its own way. The flux of immigrants has come based on issues taking place in these various countries, and it was never an issue until there were economic hard times. When Britain went through its economic hard times in the 70s, we had the oil crisis and we had petrol prices going right up. Suddenly the foreign communities became the ones that were targeted, and it wasn't just Muslims then, it was anyone of South Asian extraction or anyone of African extraction. Sikhs, because they were very visible with their turbans, were a target, and it was because they looked different, they dressed differently, that's why they became a target. So the issue of minarets, the issue of these things, it's a product of visible markers that indicate someone is different, and it's only because these tensions have been increasing with economic stress that those markers become more important. There aren't that many countries willing to talk openly to Iran.